sound going down, camera goes up, and welcome to another Sunday night edition of Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Hope everyone's having a wonderful evening tonight. Tonight, we're going to delve into a little bit of mystery. We are going back to visit the legendary detective Sherlock Holmes tonight, featuring one of his more interesting adventures, A Scandal in Bohemia. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was one of the finest mystery writers of his time. Sherlock Holmes was one of his perfect examples of where a mystery could go and make you think about what was going to happen next and who it was going to happen to. I've read other Sherlock Holmes here on the channel, and it's enjoyable. I don't know about you guys, but it's a fun time reading Sherlock Holmes. Conan Doyle was an amazing individual. He was born May 22nd, 1859, and lived 71 years. At that time, not a lot of people lived to a ripe old age, and he saw many things in his lifetime and contributed to the styles of many other writers throughout the years. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote 4 novels based on the great detective and 56 short stories featuring Holmes and Watson. Um, for me, there's nothing more fun than a good murder mystery or mystery suspense that gives me that opportunity to kind of take a look at what's going on and try to see if I can solve the mystery before the end of the book and see if I get it right. Not all the time. I used to be really pretty good at all these mysteries, but it's like fell out of it, and I hope you guys enjoy it tonight. Let's get started with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's A Sherlock Holmes Mystery. Tonight, Scandal in Bohemia, here on Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. To Sherlock Holmes, she is always the woman. I have seldom heard him mention her under any other name. In his eyes, she eclipses and predominates the whole of her sex. It was not that he felt any emotion akin to love for Irene Elder. All emotions, and that one particular, were abhorrent to his cold, precise, but admirably balanced mind. He was, I take it, the most perfect reasoning and observing machine the world has ever seen. But as a lover, he would have placed himself in a false position. He never spoke of the softer passions, save a gib or a sneer. They were admirable things for the observer, excellent for drawing the veil of men's motives and actions. But for the trained reasoner to admit such intrusions into his own delicate and finely adjusted temperament was to introduce a distracting factor which might throw a doubt upon all his mental results. Grit in a sensitive instrument, or a crack in one of his own high powered lenses, would not be more disturbing than a strong emotion in a nature such as his. And yet, there was but one woman to him, and that woman was the late Irene Alder, a dubious and questionable memory. I have seen little of Holmes lately. My marriage had drifted us away from each other. My own complete happiness and the home centered interest which rises up around a man who first finds himself master of his own establishment, were sufficient to absorb all my attention, while Holmes, who loathed every form of society with his whole Bohemian soul, remained in our lodgings in Baker Street, buried among his old books, and alternating from week to week between the cocaine and ambition, the drowsiness of the drug, and the fierce energy of his keen nature. He was still, as ever, deeply attracted by the study of crime, occupied his immense faculties and extraordinary powers of observation in following out those clues and clearing up those mysteries which had been abandoned as hopeless by official police. From time to time, I heard some vague account of his doings, of his summons to Odessa in the case of Trepoff murder, of his clearing up of the singular tragedy of the Atkinson brothers at Trincomalee, and finally the mission which he accomplished so delicately and successfully for the reigning family of Holland. Beyond these, his signs of activity, however, which I merely shared with a part of the readers of the daily press, I knew little of my former friend and companion. One night, it was on the 20th of March, 1888, I was returning from a journey to a patient, for I now returned to civil practice, when my way led me through Baker Street. As I passed the well remembered door, which I always be associated in my mind with my wooing and the dark incidents of the study in scarlet, I was seized with a keen desire to see Holmes again, and to know how he was employing his extraordinary powers. His rooms were brilliantly lit, and even I looked up and I saw his tall, spare figure pass twice in a silhouette against the blinds. He was pacing the room swiftly. He was pace eagerly with his head sunk upon his chest and his hands clasped behind him. To me, who knew his every mood and habit, his attitude and manner told his own story. And it was again he had risen out of his drug created dreams and was hot upon some scent of a new problem. I rang the bell and was shown up to the chamber which had formerly been in part my own. His manner was not effusive. It seldom was, but he was glad, I think, to see me. With a hearty with hardly a spoken word, but with a kindly eye, he waved me to an armchair, threw across a case of cigars, and indicated a spirit case of gasogene in the corner. Then he stood before the fire and looked me over in his singular introspective fashion. "Wedlock suits you," he remarked. "I think, Watson, that you have put on 7.5 pounds since I've seen you." "7," I answered. "Indeed, I should have thought a little more, just a trifle more. I fancy, Watson, in in practice again, I observe, you did not tell me that you intended to go into harness. Then how did you know?" "I see it, I deduce it." "How do I know that you have been getting yourself very wet lately? That you have a most clumsy and careless servant girl?" "My dear Holmes," said I, "this is too much. You would certainly have been burned if you'd lived a few centuries ago. It is true that I had a country walk on Thursday, and came home in a dreadful mess. But as I have changed my clothes, I can't how you deduce it. And as to Mary Jane, she is incorrigible, and my wife has given her notice. But there again, I failed to see how you worked it out." He chuckled at himself and rubbed his long, nervous hands together. "It is simplicity itself," he said. My eye tells me that on the inside of your left shoe, just where their firelight strikes it, the leather is scored by six almost parallel cuts. Obviously, they have been caused by someone who has been very careless, scraping around the edges of the sole in order to remove crusted mud. Hence, you see my double deduction that you had been out in vile weather and that you had a particularly malignant boot slitting specimen of the London slavery. As to your practice, if a gentleman walks into my rooms smelling of iodoform, with a black mark of nitrate and silver upon his right forefinger, and a bulge on the right side of his top hat to show where he was secreted his stethoscope, I must be dull indeed if I do not pronounce him to be an active member of the medical profession. I could not help laughing at the ease of which he explained his process of deduction. When I hear you have given your reasons, I remarked, the thing always appears to me to be so ridiculously simple, and that I could easily do it myself, though at each successive instance of your reasoning, I am baffled until you explain your process. And yet, I believe my eyes are as good as yours. Quite so, he answered, lighting a cigarette and throwing himself down into an armchair. You see, but you do not observe. The distinction is clear. For example, you have frequently seen the steps which lead up from the hall to this room. Frequently. How often? Well, some hundreds of times. Then how many are there? How many? I do not know. Quite so. You have not been observed, yet you have seen. That is just my point. Now, I know that there are 17 steps because I have both seen and observed. By the way, since you are interested in these little problems, and since you are good enough to chronicle one or two of my trifling experiences, you may be interested in this. He threw over a sheet of thick pink tinted notepaper which had been lying upon the table. It came by the last post, he said. Read it aloud. The note was undated and without either signature or address. I will call upon you tonight at 7:45, it said. A gentleman who desires to consult you upon a matter of the deepest secret moment. Your recent services in one of the royal houses of Europe have shown that you are one of many. You may safely be trusted with matters which are of importance which can hardly be exaggerated. This account of which we have all quartered received. Be in your chamber then at the hour, and do not take it amiss if your visitor wears a mask. This is indeed a mystery, I remarked. What do you imagine it means? I have no data yet. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories, instead of theories to suit facts. But the more one, but the note itself, what do you deduce from it? I carefully examined the writing in the paper upon which it had been written. The man who wrote it was presumably well-to-do, I remarked, endeavoring to imitate my companion's process. Such paper could not be bought under half a crown a packet. It is peculiarly strong and stiff. Peculiar, that is the very word, said Holmes. It is not an English paper at all. Hold it up to the light. I did so, and I saw a large E with a small g, and a P and a large G, and with a small T woven into the texture of the paper. What do you make of that? Asked Holmes. The name of the maker, no doubt, or his monogram, rather. None at all. The G with the small t stands for Gestalt, which is German for company. It is customary contraction like our CO or P, of course, stands for paper. And now the EG. Let us glance at our Continental Gazette. He took down a heavy brown volume from his shelves. Iglo, Iglonitz. Ah, here we are. Igria. It is a German speaking country in Bohemia, not far from Karlsbad. Remarkable as being the scene of the death of Wallenstein, and for all its numerous glass factories and paper mills. Ha ha, my boy, what do you make of that? His eyes sparkled and sent up a great blue triumphant cloud from his cigarette. The paper was made in Bohemia, I said. Precisely. And the man who wrote the note is German. Do you note the peculiar construction of the sentence? This account you will have from all your quarters received. A Frenchman or Russian could not have written that. It is the German who is so uncourteous into his verbs. It is only remains, therefore, to discover what is wanted by this German who writes upon Bohemian paper and prefers wearing a mask to showing his face. And here he comes, if I'm not mistaken, to resolve all our doubts. As he spoke, there was a sharp sound of horses' hoofs and grating wheels against the curb, followed by a sharp pull of the bell. Holmes whistled. A pair, by the sound, he said. Yes, he continued, glancing out the window. A nice little brougham and a pair of beauties. 150 guineas apiece. There is money in this case, Watson, if there is anything else. I think I'd better go, Holmes. Not a bit, doctor. Stay where you are. I am lost without my Boswell, and this promises to be interesting. It would be a pity to miss it. But your client, never mind him. I may want your help, and so may he. Here he comes. Sit down in that armchair, doctor, and give us your best attention. A slow, heavy step, which had been heard upon the steps and in the passage, paused immediately outside the door. There was a loud and authoritative tap. Come in, said Holmes. A man entered who could hardly have been less than 6 feet 6 inches in height, with the chest and limbs of Hercules. His dress was with richness which would be in England be looked upon as akin to bad taste. Heavy bands astrakhan were slashed around the sleeves and the fronts of his double-breasted coat, while the deep blue cloak which was thrown over his shoulders was lined with flame-colored silk and secured at the neck with a brooch which consisted of a single flaming beryl. Boots which have extended halfway up to his calves, and which are trimmed at the top with rich brown fur, completed the impression of barbaric opulence which was suggested by his whole appearance. He carried a broad-brimmed hat in his hands, while he wore across the upper part of his face, extending down past the cheekbones, a black-visaged mask, which he apparently adjusted at the very moment, for his hand was still raised to it as he entered. From the lower part of his face he appeared to be a man of strong character, with thick hanging lip. His long straight chin suggested of resolution pushed to the length of obstinacy. You had my note? He asked, with a deep, harsh accent and a strongly marked German accent. I told you I would call. He looked at from one to the other of us, as if uncertain to address. Pray take a seat, said Holmes. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, who is occasionally good enough to help me in my cases. Whom have I the honor to address?" "You may address me as Count von Kram, a Bohemian nobleman. I understand that this gentleman, your friend, is a man of honor and distinction, whom I may trust with a matter of the most extreme importance. If not, I should much prefer to communicate with you alone." I rose to go, but Holmes caught me by the wrist and pushed me back in my chair. "It is both or none," he said. "You may say before this gentleman anything you may say to me." The Count shrugged his broad shoulders. "Then I must begin," he said, "by binding you both to absolute secrecy for 2 years. At the end of the time, the matter will be of no importance. At the present, it is too much to say that it is much weight of many have influence upon the European history." "I promise," said Holmes. "And I." "You will excuse this mask," continued our strange visitor. "The august person who employs me wishes his agent to be unknown to you. And I may confess that at once that little title by which I have just called myself is not exactly my own." "I was aware of it," said Holmes dryly. "The circumstances are of great delicacy, and every precaution must be taken to quench what might be an immense scandal and seriously compromise one of the reigning families of Europe. To speak plainly, the matter implicates the great house of Ormstein, the hereditary kings of Bohemia." "I was also aware of that," murmured Holmes, settling down into his armchair and closing his eyes. Our visitor glanced with some apparent surprise at the languid, lounging figure of the man who had been, no doubt, depicted to be him, at the most incisive reasoner and the most energetic agent in Europe. Holmes slowly reopened his eyes and and looked impatiently at his gigantic client. "If your Majesty would condescend to state his case," he remarked, "I should be better able to advise you." The man sprang from his chair and paced up and down the room uncontrollable agitation. Then, with a gesture, he tore his mask from his face and hurled it to the ground. "You are right," he cried. "I am the king. Why should I attempt to conceal it?" "Why, indeed?" murmured Holmes. "Your Majesty had not spoken before I was aware that I was addressing Wilhelm Gottfried von Olmstein, Grand Duke of Cassel-Felstein, and hereditary King of Bohemia." "But you can understand," said our strange visitor, sitting down once more and passing his hand over his high white forehead, "you can understand that I am not accustomed to doing such business in my own person. Yet the matter was so delicate that I could not confide it to an agent without putting myself in his power. I have come incognito from Prague for the purpose of consulting you." "Then pray consult," said Holmes, shutting his eyes once more. "The facts are briefly these. Some 5 years ago, during a lengthy visit to Warsaw, I made the acquaintance of the well-known adventuress Irene Adler. The name you no doubt familiar to you." "Kindly look her up in my index, doctor," murmured Holmes without opening his eyes. For many years he had adopted a system of docking all paragraphs concerning men and things, so it was difficult for the name or subject or person on which could not be once furnished the information. In this case, I found her biography sandwiched in between that of a Hebrew rabbi and that of a staff commander who had written a monograph upon deep sea fishes. Let me see, said Holmes. Hmm. Born in New Jersey in the year 1858. Contralto. Hmm. La Scala. Hmm. Prima Donna Imperial Opera of Warsaw. Yes. Retired from operatic stage. Ah. Living in London. Quite so. Your Majesty, as I quite understand, became entangled with this young person, wrote her some compromising letters, and is now desirous of getting those letters back. Precisely so. But how? Was there a secret marriage? None. No legal papers or certificates? None. Then I fail to follow your Majesty. If this young person should produce her letters for blackmailing or other purposes, how is she to prove their authenticity? There is the writing. Poof. Forgery. My private notepaper. Stolen. My own seal. Imitated. My photograph. Bought. We are both in the photograph. Oh dear, that is very bad. Your Majesty has indeed committed indiscretion. I was mad, insane. You have compromised yourself seriously. I was only a crown prince then. I was young, but I am 30 now. It must be recovered. You have tried and failed? Your Majesty must pay. It must be bought. She will not sell it. Stolen then. 5 attempts have been made. Twice burglars in my pay ransacked the house. Once we diverted her luggage where she had traveled. Twice she had been waylaid. There has been no result. No sign of it. Absolutely none. Holmes laughed. It is quite a pretty problem, he said. But a very serious one to me, returned the king reproachfully. Very indeed. What does she propose to do with the photograph? To ruin me. But how? I am to be married. So I have heard. To Clotted Lotham von Saxe-Meiningen, second daughter of the King of Scandinavia. You may know that the strict principles of her family. She herself is the very soul of delicacy. A shadow of doubt has to conduct A shadow of a doubt as to my conduct would bring the matter to an end. And Irene Adler threatens to send them the photograph, and she will do it. I know she will do it. You do not know her, but she has a soul of steel. She has the face of the most beautiful woman and the mind of the most resolute men. Rather than I should marry another woman, there are no lengths to which she would not go. None. You are sure she has not sent it yet? I am sure. And why? Because she has said that she would send it on the day when the betrothal was publicly proclaimed. That will be next Monday. Oh, so we have 3 days yet, said Holmes with a yawn. That is very fortunate, as I have one or two matters of importance to look into just at the present. Your Majesty will, of course, stay in London for the present? Certainly. You will find me at the Langham under the name Count von Kram. Then I will drop you a line to let you know how we progress. Pray do so, and I shall be all anxiety. Then, as to money, you have carte blanche. Absolutely. I tell you, I would give one of my provinces of my kingdom if to have that photograph, and for present expenses. The king took a heavy chamois leather bag from under the coat and laid it on the table. There are £300 in gold and 700 in notes, he said. Holmes scribbled a receipt upon the sheet of the notebook and handed it to him. And Mademoiselle's address is Briony Lodge, Serpentine Avenue, St. John's Wood. Holmes took a note of it. One other question, he said. Was the photograph a cabinet? It was. Then, good night, Your Majesty. I trust we shall soon have some good news for you. And good night, Watson, he added, as the wheels of the Royal Brougham rolled down the street. If you'll be good to call tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, I should like to chat this matter over with you. Chapter 2. At 3 o'clock precisely, I was at Baker Street, but Holmes had not yet returned. The landlady informed me that he had left the house shortly after 8 o'clock in the morning. I sat down beside the fire, with, however, the intention of awaiting him, however long he might be. I was already deeply interested in his inquiry, for, though it was surrounded by none of the grim and strange features which we are associated with the two crimes which we had already recorded, still, the nature of the case and the exalted station of his client gave it a character of its own. Indeed, apart from the nature of the investigation which my friend had on hand, there was something in his masterly grasp of the situation, and his keen, incisive reasoning, which made it a pleasure for me to study his system of work and to follow disentangled by his most intractable mysteries. So accustomed was I to his invariable successes that the very possibility of his failing had ceased to enter into my mind. Hang on, guys, I hit the wrong button. It was close upon 4 before the door opened, and a drunken-looking groom, ill-kept and side-whiskered, with an inflamed face and disreputable clothes, walked into the room. Accustomed as I was to my friend's amazing powers to use of disguises, I had to look 3 times before I was certain that it was indeed he. With a nod, he vanished into the bedroom, whence he emerged in 5 minutes, tweed suited and respectable as of old. Putting his hands in his pockets, he stretched out his legs in front of the fire, laughed heartily for some minutes. Well, really, he cried, and then choked and laughed again until he was obligated to lie back, limp and helpless, in the chair. What is it? It is quite too funny. I am sure you could never guess how I employed my morning, or what I was ended by doing. I can't imagine. I suppose that you have been watching the habits and perhaps the house of Miss Irene Elder. Quite so. But the sequel was rather unusual. I will tell you, however. I left the house a little after 8 o'clock in the morning in the character of a groom out of work. There was a wonderful sympathy and a freemasonry among horseymen. Be one of them, and you will know all that is to know. I soon found Briony Lodge. It was a bijou villa, with a garden in the back, but built out of the front right of to the road, 2 stories. Chubb block to the door, large sitting room on the right side, well furnished with long windows almost to the floor, and those preposterous English window fasteners which a child could open. Beyond there was nothing remarkable, save that the passage window could be reached from the top of the coach house. I walked around it and examined it closely from every point of view, but without noting anything else of interest. I then lounged down the street and found, as I expected, that there was a mews in the lane which runs down one of the walls of the garden. I lent the ulsters to a hand in rubbing down the horses, and received in exchange twopence, a glass and a half, two fills of shag tobacco, and as much information as I could desire about Miss F, to say nothing about the half dozen other people in the neighborhood who seemed not to least interested, but whose biographies I was compelled to listen to. And what of Irene Elder? I asked. Oh, she has turned all the men's heads down in that part. She is the daintiest thing under a bonnet on this planet. To say the Serpentine Muse to a man, she lives quietly, sings at concerts, drives out at 5 every day, and returns at 7 sharp for dinner. Seldom goes out at any other times, except when she sings. Has only one male visitor, but a good deal of him. He is dark, handsome, and dashing, never calls less than once a day, and often twice. He is a Mr. Godfrey Norton of the Inner Temple. See the advantage of a cabman as a confidant. They had driven him home a dozen times from Serpentine Mews, and knew all about him. When I had listened to all they had to tell, I began to walk up and down the Briony Lodge once more, and to think over my planned campaign. This Godfrey Norton was evidently an important factor in the matter. He was a lawyer. That sounded ominous. What was the relationship between them, and what the object of his repeated visits? Was she his client, his friend, or his mistress? If the former, she had probably transferred the photograph to his keeping. If the latter, it is less likely. On the issue of the question depended whether I should continue my work at Briony Lodge, or turn my attention to the gentleman's chamber in the temple. It was a delicate point, and it widened the field of my inquiry. I fear that I bore you with these details, but I have to let you see my little difficulties if you are to understand the situation. I'm following you closely, I answered. I am still balancing the matter in my head when a hansom cab drove up to Briony Lodge, and a gentleman sprang out. He was a remarkably handsome man, dark aquiline, and a mustache, evidently the man of whom I had heard. He appeared to be in a great hurry, shouted to the cabman to wait, and brushed past the maid, who opened the door with an air of a man who was thoroughly at home. He was in the house about a half hour, and I could catch glimpses of him in the windows of the sitting room, pacing up and down, talking excitedly, and waving his arms. Of her I could not see. Presently he emerged, looking even more flurried than before. As he stepped into the cab, he pulled a gold watch from his pocket and looked at it earnestly. "Drive like the devil," he shouted. "First to Grouse and Hankey's in Regent Street, and then to the Church of St. Monica on Eldwer Road. Half a guinea if you make it in 20 minutes." Away they went, and I was just wondering whether I should not do to follow them up the lane, to came to a neat landau, the coachman with his coat only half buttoned, and his tie under each ear, while all the tags of his harness were sticking out of the buckles. It hadn't pulled up before she shot out of the hall door and into it. I only caught a glimpse of her at the moment, but she was a lovely woman, with a face that man might die for. "The Church of St. Monica, John," she cried, "and half a sovereign if you reach it in 20 minutes." This was quite a good. This is quite too good to lose, Watson. I was just balancing whether I should run for it or whether I should perch behind her landau when the cab came through the street. The driver looked twice at such a shabby fare, but I jumped in before he could object. The Church of St. Monica, I said, and half a sovereign if you reach it in 20 minutes. It was 25 minutes to 12, and of course, it was clear enough at what was in the wind. My cabbie drove fast. I don't think I've ever drove faster, but the others were there before us. The cab and the landau, with their steaming horses, were in the front of the door when I arrived. I paid the man and hurried into the church. There was not a soul there save two whom I followed as a surpliced clergyman who seemed to be exploitating with them. They were all three standing in a knot in front of the altar. I lounged up along the side aisle like any other idler who has dropped into church. Suddenly, to my surprise, the three at the altar faced around to me, and Godfrey Newton came running as hard as he could towards me. "Thank God!" he cried. "You'll do. Come, come." "What then?" I asked. "Come, man, come. Only 3 minutes, or it won't be legal." I was half dragged up to the altar, and before I knew I was found myself mumbling responses in which were whispered in my ear, and vouching for things of which I knew nothing, and generally assisting in the secure tying of Irene Alder, spinster, to Godfrey Norton, bachelor. It was all done in an instant, and there was the gentleman thanking me on the one side and the lady on the other, while the clergyman beamed on me in front. It was the most preposterous position in which I have ever found myself in my life, and it was the thought of that it started me laughing just now. It seems that there has been some formality about their license, and the clergyman absolutely refused to marry them without some witness of some sort, and to my lucky appearance saved the bridegroom from having to sally out to the streets in search of a best man. The bride gave me a sovereign, and I mean to wear it on my watch chain in memory of the occasion. "This is a very unexpected turn of affairs," said I. "And what then?" "Well, I found my plans very seriously menaced. It looked as if the pair might take an immediate departure, and so necessitated very prompt and energetic measures on my part." At the church door, however, they separated, and driving back to the temple, and she to her own house. "I shall drive out to the park at 5 as usual," she said as she left him. I heard no more. They drove away in different directions, and I went off to make my own arrangements. "Which are?" "Some cold beef and a glass of beer," he answered. "The ringing of the bell. I have been too busy to think of food, and I am likely to be busier this evening. By the way, doctor, I shall want your cooperation." "I shall be delighted." You don't mind breaking the law?" "Not in the least." "Nor running a chance of arrest?" "Not in a good cause." "Oh, the cause is excellent." "Then I'm your man." "I was sure that I might rely on you. But what is it you wish?" "When Mrs. Turner has brought in the tray, I will make it clear to you. Now," he said as he turned hungrily on the simple fare that our landlady had provided, "I must discuss at it while I eat, for I am not for I have not much time. It is nearly 5 now. In 2 hours we must be on the scene of action. Miss Irene, or Madame, rather, returns from her drive at 7. We must be at Briony Lodge to meet her. And what then? You must leave that to me. I have already arranged what it is to occur. There is only one point of which I must insist. You must not interfere, come what may. You understand. I am to be neutral. You to do nothing whatsoever. There will probably be some small unpleasantness. Do not join in it. It will end in the being conveyed into the house. 4 or 5 minutes ahead afterwards, the sitting room window will open. You are to station yourself close to that open window. Yes. You are to watch for me, for I will be visible to you. Yes. And when I raise my hand, so you will throw into the room what I am to get throw, and I will at the same time raise a cry of fire. You quite follow me? Entirely. It is nothing very formidable, he said, taking a long cigar shaped roll from his pocket. It is an ordinary plumber's smoke rocket, fitted with a cap on either end to make it self lighting. Your task is to confine that. When you raise your cry to fire, it will be taken up by a number of people. You may then walk to the end of the road, and I will join you in 10 minutes. I hope I have made myself clear. I am to remain neutral, to get near the window, to watch you, and at the signal to throw this object, then raise a cry of fire, and to wait for you at the corner of the street. Precisely. Then you may entirely rely on. That is excellent. I think perhaps it is almost time that I prepare for the new role I have to play. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned in a few minutes in the character of an amiable but simple minded nonconformist clergyman. His broad black hat, his baggy trousers, his white tie, his sympathetic smile, and his general look of peering and his benevolent curiosity were such as John Hare could have equaled. It was not merely that Holmes changed its costume. His expression, his manner, his very soul seemed to vary with every fresh part he assumed. The stage lost a fine actor, even as science lost an acute reasoner, when he became a specialist in crime. It was 6:15 when we left Baker Street, and it is still wanted 10 minutes to the hour when we found ourselves in Serpentine Avenue. It was already dusk, and the lamps were just being lit as we paced up and down in front of the Briony Lodge, waited for the coming of its occupant. The house was just as I pictured it from Holmes's description. Succulent description, but the locality appeared to be less private than I expected. On the contrary, for a small street in a quiet neighborhood, it was quite remarkably animated. There was a group of shabbily dressed men smoking and laughing on the corner, a scissors grinder with his wheel, two guardsmen who were flirting with the nurse girl, and several well dressed young men who were lounging up and down with cigars in their mouths. You see, remarked Holmes, as we paced to and fro in front of the house, this marriage rather simplifies matters. The photograph becomes a double edged weapon now. The chances are that she has adverse to being seen by Mr. Godfrey Norton, as our client is to coming to the eyes of the princess. Now the question is, where are we to find the photograph? Indeed, where? It is most likely that she carries it about with her. It is cabinet size, too large for easy concealment, about the woman's dress. She knows that the king is capable of having her waylaid and searched. Two attempts of this sort have already been made. We may take it, then, that she does not carry it about her. Where, then? Her banker or her lawyer? There is that double possibility, but I am inclined to think neither. Women are naturally secretive, and they like to do their own secreting. Why should she hand it over to anyone else? She could trust her own guardianship, but she could not tell what indirect or political influence might be brought up to bear upon a businessman. Besides, remember that she had resolved to use it within a few days. There must be it must be where she can lay her hands upon it. It must be in her house. But it's been twice burgled. Psh! They do not know how to look. But how will you look? I will not look. What then? I will get her to show me. But she will refuse. She will not be able to. But I hear the rumble of carriage wheels. It is her carriage. Now carry out my orders to the letter. As he spoke, the gleam of the sidelights and the carriage came around the curve of the avenue. It was a smart little landau which rattled to the door of the Briony Lodge. As it pulled up, one of the loafing men at the corner dashed forward to open the door in the hope of earning a copper, but was elbowed away by another loafer who had rushed up with some intention. A fierce quarrel broke out, which was increased by the two guardsmen who took sides with the young loungers, and by the scissor grinder who was equally hot upon the side. A blow was struck, and in an instant the lady, who was stepped from her carriage, was at the center of a little knot of flushed and strangling men, who struck savagely at each other with her fists and sticks. Holmes dashed into the crowd to protect the lady, but just as he reached her, he gave a cry and dropped to the ground, with blood running freely from his face. At his fall, the guardsmen took to their heels to one direction, and the loungers in another, while a number of better dressed people, who had watched the scuffle without taking part in it, crowded in to help the lady and to attend to the injured man. Irene Elder, as I will still call her, had hurried up the steps, but she stood at the top with her superb figure outlined against the lights of the hall, looking back into the street. "Is the poor gentleman much hurt?" she asked. "He is dead," cried several. "No, no, there's still life in him," shouted another, "but he'll be gone before you get him to the hospital." "He's a brave fellow," said a woman. "They would have had the lady's purse and watched if they hadn't been for him. They were a gang, and a rough one, too. Ah, he's breathing now. He just can't lie in the street. May we bring him in, Mom?" "Surely. Bring him into the sitting room. There is a comfortable sofa. This way, please." Slowly and solemnly he was borne into Briony Lodge and laid out in principal room, while I still observed the proceedings from my post by the window. The lamps had all been lit, but the blinds had not been drawn, so that I could see Holmes as he lay upon the couch. I do not know whether he was seized with compunction at the moment for the part he was playing, but I know that I never felt more heartily ashamed of myself in my life than when I came and I saw the beautiful creature against whom I was conspiring, or the grace and kindliness with which she waited upon the injured man. And yet It would have been the blackest treachery to Holmes to draw back now from part from which he had entrusted me. I hardened my heart and took the smoke rocket from underneath my ulster. After all, I thought that we weren't injuring her, but we are preventing her from injuring another. Holmes had sat up upon the couch, and I saw him motion like a man who needed some air. A maid rushed across and threw open the window. At the same instant, I saw him raise his hand, and at the signal, I tossed my rocket into the room with a cry of fire. The word was no sooner out of my mouth than a whole crowd of spectators, well dressed and ill gentlemen, ulsters, and servant maids, joined in a general shriek of fire. Their thick clouds and smoke curled through the room and out of the open window. I caught a glimpse of rushing figures, and a moment later the voice of Holmes from within, assuring them that it was a false alarm. Slipping through a shouting crowd, I made my way to the corner of the street, and in 10 minutes was rejoiced to find my friend's arm in mine, and to get away from the scene of the uproar. He walked swiftly and in silence for some few minutes until we had turned down one of the quiet streets which leads towards Edgware Road. "You did very nicely, doctor," he remarked. "Nothing could have been better. It is all right. You have the photograph." "I know where it is." "And how did you find out?" "She showed me, as I told you she would." "I'm still in the dark, Holmes." "I do not wish to make a mystery," he said, laughing. "The matter was perfectly simple. You, of course, saw that everyone in the street was a accomplice. They were all engaged for the evening." "I guessed as much." "Then, when the row broke out, I had the little moist red paint in the palm of my hand. I crushed it forward, fell down, clasped my hand to my face, and became a piteous spectacle. It is an old trick. That also I could fathom. And then they carried me in. She bound to have me in. What else could she do? And into her sitting room, which was the very room which I suspected. It lay between that and her bedroom, and I was determined to see which. They laid me on the couch. I motioned for air. They were compelled to open the window, and you had your chance." "How did that help you?" "It was all important. When a woman thinks that her house is on fire, her instinct is to once rush to the one thing which she values most. It is a perfectly overpowering impulse, and I have more than once taken advantage of it. In the case of the Darlington substitution scandal, it was the use of me, and also in the Arnsworth Castle business. A married woman grabbed at her baby, an unmarried one reached for her jewelry box. It is now clear to me that Our Lady of today had nothing in the house more precious than that of what she would have quest of. She would rush to secure it. The alarm of fire was admirably done. The smoke and shouting were enough to shake nerves of steel. She responded beautifully. The photograph is in the recess behind the sliding panel, just above the right bell pull. It was there in the instant, and I caught a glimpse of it as she half drew it out. When I cried out it was a false alarm, she replaced it, glanced at the rocket, rushed into the room, and I have not seen her since. I rose, and making my excuses, escaped from the house. I hesitated whether to attempt to secure the photograph at once, but the coachman had come in, and as he was watching me narrowly, it seemed safer to wait. A little over precipitation may ruin it all. And now, I asked, our quest is practically finished. I shall call with the king tomorrow, and with you, if you care to come with us, we shall be shown into the sitting room to wait for our lady. But it is comparable that when she comes, she may find neither us nor the photograph. It may just be a satisfaction of his majesty to regain it with his own hands. And when will you call? At 8 in the morning. She will not be up, so that she'll give us a clear field. Besides, we must be prompted for this marriage. Maybe it be a complete change in her life habits. We must wire the king without delay. We had reached Baker Street. We had reached Baker Street and stopped at the door. He reached his pockets for his keys when someone passing said, "Good night, Mr. Sherlock Holmes." There were several people on the pavement at the time, but the greeting appeared to come from a slim youth in Ulster who had hurried by. "I've heard that voice before," said Holmes, staring down dimly street. "Now I wonder who the deuce that could have been." Chapter 3. I slept at Baker Street that night, and we were engaged upon our toast and coffee in the morning when the King of Bohemia rushed into the room. "You have it? You have it? Really got it?" he cried, grasping Holmes by either shoulder and looking eagerly in his face. "Not yet." "But you have hopes?" "I have hopes." "Then come. I am all impatient to be gone. We must have a cab." "No, I bought my brougham is waiting." "Then that will simplify matters. We will descend in and start off once more for Briony Lodge." "Irene Elder is married," remarked Holmes. "Married? When?" "Yesterday." "But to whom?" "To an English lawyer named Norton." "But she could not love him." "I am in hopes that she does." "And why in hopes?" "Because it would spare your majesty all the fear of the future annoyance if the lady loves her husband and does not love your majesty. If she does not love your majesty, and there is no reason why she should interfere with your majesty's plan." "It is true, and yet, well, I wish she could have been my own station. What a queen she would have made." He relapsed into a moody silence, which was not broken until we drew upon the Serpentine Avenue. The door of Briony Lodge was open, and an elderly woman stood upon the steps and watched us with sardonic eyes as we stepped from the brougham. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I believe," she said. "I am Mr. Holmes," answered my companion. Hang on, guys. "Indeed, my mistress told me that you were likely to call. She left this morning with her husband at the 5:15 train from Charing Cross for the Continent." "What?" Sherlock Holmes staggered back, white with chagrin and surprise. "Do you mean she has left England?" "Never to return." "And the papers?" asked the king, hoarsely. "All lost." "We shall see." He pushed past the servant and rushed into the drawing room, followed by the king and myself. The furniture was scattered about in every direction, and with dismantled shelves and open drawers, as if the lady had hurriedly ransacked them before her flight. Holmes rushed at the bell pull, tore back the small sliding shutter, and plunged his hand in pulling out the photograph and a letter. The photograph was of Irene Adler herself in an evening dress. The letter was subscribed to Sherlock Holmes, Esquire, to be opened till called for. My friend opened the letter and read all that it, and all three read it together. It was dated at midnight of the preceding night and ran this way. My dear Sherlock Holmes, you really did it very well. You took me in completely. Until after the alarm of fire, I had not a suspicion. But then, when I found how I had betrayed myself, I began to think I had been warned against you months ago, and had been told that if the king employed an agent, it would certainly be you. Your address had been given to me, yet with all this you made me reveal what you wanted to know. Even after I became suspicious, I found it hard to think evil of such a dear, kind old clergyman. But I have been trained as an actress myself. Male costume is nothing new to me. I often take advantage of the freedom of which it gives. I sent John, the coachman, to watch you run up the stairs, got into my walking clothes, as I called them, and came down just as you departed. Well, I followed you to your door, and so made sure that it was really an object of your interest to be celebrated, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Then I, rather imprudently, wished you a good night and started for the temple to see my husband. We both thought the best resource was flight, then pursued by such a formidable antagonist. So you will find the nest empty when you call tomorrow. As to your photograph, your client may rest in peace. I love and am loved by a better man than he. The king may do what he will without hindrance from one whom he has cruelly wronged. I kept it only a safeguard to safeguard myself and to preserve a weapon which will always secure me from any steps which he might take in the future. I leave a photograph which he might care to possess, and I remain, dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, very truly yours, Irene Norton, née Adler. What a woman! Oh, what a woman! Cried the King of Bohemia, when all three had read the epistle. Did I not tell you how quick and resolute she was? Would she not have made an admirable queen? Is it not a pity that she was not on my level? From what I have seen of the lady, she seems, indeed, to be a very different level than your own majesty, Holmes said coldly. I am sorry that I could not have been bringing your majesty's business to a more successful conclusion. On the contrary, my dear sir, cried the king, nothing could be more successful. I know that her word is inviolate. The photograph is now as safe as if it were in the fire. I am glad to hear your majesty say so. I am immensely indebted to you. Pray me in what way I can reward you. This ring. He slipped an emerald snake ring from his finger and held it out in a palm of his hand. Your majesty has something which I should value even more highly, said Holmes. You have but to name it. This photograph. The king stared at him in amazement. Irene's photograph, he cried. Certainly, if you wish it. I thank you, your majesty. There is nothing more to be done in the matter. I have the honor to wish you a very good morning. He bowed, and returning away without observing the hand which the king had outstretched to him, and set off in my company for his chambers. And that is how a great scandal threatened to affect the kingdom of Bohemia, and how the best plans of Sherlock Holmes were beaten by a woman's wit. He used to make merry over the cleverness of women, but I have not heard him do it as of late. And when he speaks of Irene Adler or refers to her photograph, it is always under the honorable title of the woman. And that, my friends, is a scandal in Bohemia, a Sherlock Holmes mystery. I hope you enjoyed it. A lot of fun, a lot of good mystery that makes you realize that not every conclusion is what you expect. And this is one of the best that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has ever read and written, I should say. Um, with all our stuff here, we always remind you that I appreciate every one of you stopping in to watch Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. You guys are awesome. I appreciate you guys stopping in to watch. And if you guys get a chance, always please remember, like and subscribe. And let me know how you guys are doing. Let me know. My email is right here. JoelK_OG@Comcast.net. Let me know. I got a few emails from some people down southern part of the US. Thank you. Appreciate that. I really do. And I'll try to fulfill those requests when I get a chance. By the way, for those of you tuning in for the first time to this show, this is a show where we read public domain books, only public domain books, and occasionally a few surprises. Like in a few weeks, just before the um, the weekend on coming up on the weekend before Christmas, we will be doing something special here. Back on the weekend before Halloween, we did something fun. We showed a movie, a public domain movie called Nosferatu. It is the first silent movie horror movie. And it was a lot of fun, and I'm glad everybody tuned in and enjoyed it. I really am. This year, for the first time, we'll be doing something for Christmas. But we're going to have a little bit more fun along the way on this one. And something that's going to make you groan and roll your eyes too. Because on the Sunday before Christmas, we will be showing here for the first time ever Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. Next week, I'll show you a bit of the original movie poster, and I think you'll get a kick out of it when we play it in a few weeks. Can you imagine? Christmas is coming up. Coming up in, several weeks from now on the last Thursday of the month. By the way, welcome to December. We will be celebrating on New Year's Eve the third anniversary of Accessibly Live, the Conversation Station, my other show on Thursday nights. And I hope you guys tune in to enjoy it. Now, we're gonna get ready to close out the store. Get ready to close up the shop, and I appreciate everybody who stopped in to say hello. Um, like what we do on Thursday, we normally throw a little bit of humor at you, um, or a good quote to kind of round out the show, and I thought this might be kind of cool. Live so that your life was a book Florida would ban. And believe me, I have. Maybe. As I said, guys, I appreciate you guys stopping in. Live so that your life was a book Florida would ban. Don't forget to like and subscribe when you get a chance. This is Accessibly Live, the book club reading room, every single Thursday night. Yeah, every single Sunday night. Yes, it's been one of those days, guys. Every single Sunday night here on Twitch TV. And don't forget, this show does get broadcast or put over, I should say. It's been one of those Sundays, guys. We will be shown also on YouTube. So if you got friends who don't do Twitch but do YouTube, tell them to turn us in, turn us on. Joel K underscore OG. Check us out on YouTube. I appreciate it. Email once again. I'm going to get out of here. I appreciate everybody who stopped in. This is Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Every single Sunday night live on Twitch, put over onto YouTube right after. Be well, be safe, be kind. Take care, all. Thank you again for all your visits, all your likes and subscribes. Let's get out of here, guys. Have a good night. We will see you next week. Take care now. Bye bye.